training series. And this week we are doing the Tennessee Pulse overview and how to read an IEP. We have Tennessee STEP, and we're always excited to have Karen Henderson here to be our presenter. And we'll be doing a couple more trainings in the future, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I really wanted to get Karen to get started because, like I said, she has quite a bit to present. So thank you for coming, Karen.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. So my name's Karen Harrison, and I am the Executive Director of TNSTEP. And some of you may have known us as STEP, and we rebranded about a year and a half ago as TNSTEP to be more recognizable and easier to find in all those search boxes that people are looking for things. And so thank you for joining today. Although I love the convenience of virtual, I hope someday we'll all be together in a great big parent training in Knox County, maybe next year or later this year or something where we can interact. I'd love to know who my audience is today. I am, if you haven't met me, I am a parent of a now young adult with special needs who had an IEP during her school career and is a happy contributing member of her community. And a lot of that is I went through a lot of the TN-STEP trainings and learned what my rights are and how to navigate things. And so the thing that we're going to talk about today with the TN Pulse is what is TN Pulse? What do families need to know about that? And then a brief overview of how to read an IEP, particularly with the TN Pulse has a couple of other things, features in there, things that you might show that might pop up on your IEP that you're wondering about. And just as a disclaimer, IEP or Individualized Education Program is a very in-depth topic. So I won't be able to cover everything in the IP, but as Sarah says, don't panic. TN-STEP is here. Our team is here. There'll be contact information, so you can call us at any time to get your questions answered. We do IEP reviews with families to help them walk through goals or objectives or pieces of the IEP that they might have questions about. So if you wouldn't mind to put in the chat box very quickly, if you're a parent, put your child's age and if they have an IEP or 504 or both. And if you're here as a teacher, just put that you're an educator, special education related service provider or other. That will help me just to know who my audience is and will help me with my examples that I give so that I know kind of ages and things like that. So if you'll just take just a minute and put those in the chat box. If you're a parent, your child's age, and if they have an IEP, 504 or both, or they don't have either yet. That's would be good to know. If you're an educator, kind of your role or your other role.
Just what we're getting, Karen. We have an advocate. We have somebody who has an IEP that's 16, another parent that has a child who's 14. We have somebody from DCS that is an education consultant, an IEP and a CFSS person, an IEP with an 18-year-old and a child 11 years old with an IEP.
Perfect. All right. Thank you for sharing that with us and with me, and I'm glad you're here. So TN Pulse, Pulse stands for Tennessee Plans for Learning Success and Excellence. And it provides a free standardized web-based platform for school districts, public charter schools, and state-operated programs to serve as the state system of record for student learning plans. And that includes individualized education plans or IEPs, 504 plans for students with disabilities, individual learning plans or ILPs, and you know we love our acronyms, ILPs for English learners, and ILP-Ds, which are plans for students with characteristics of dyslexia. Previously, you would have heard, and Sue and I have been having some issues calling words today. So you might have heard it called Easy IEP, and that's what was used by the Department of Education for years to manage IEPs. And one of the great things about Tennessee Pulse is that it expanded to cover 504s, individual learning plans, ILPDs, all of that in one space, and walks teachers through, educators through different steps in a very systematic way. So questions don't get skipped by accident, or there's like a one-stop shop for all of this information. So you could, someone could look very quickly and see if a student has an IEP and an ILPD, or a 504 and an IEP, which is not common, but does happen. So this supports the individual learning for Tennessee students in alignment with the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement Act, which is TISA, and it replaces the Easy IEP system, expands functionality and features, and allows users to track federal and state compliance components. So we're going to jump in and look at some of these components. This is kind of an inside look at what the screen of the Tennessee Pulse looks like, and walks you through in the initial eligibility process. An LEA, as you can see there on the left, must complete the initial evaluation and the eligibility determination within 60 calendar days of receiving a parental consent for an initial evaluation. And so just the importance of, if you've asked for an evaluation, making sure that you get the paperwork and sign your consent, because that's when the timeline starts, is of 60 calendar days from receiving parental consent. So one of the features of the Tennessee Pulse is that it has prompts and reminders, and it also has some best practices built in that will prompt, maybe there's new educators or new teachers, and there are some really great features in there about best practices. So once the determination is made, it would prompt them to go to the next piece or the next screen, and they must hold an initial meeting to develop an IEP if a student is determined to be eligible within 30 calendar days of determining that the student needs special education and related services. So that's kind of where the special education initial eligibility starts in Tennessee Pulse. Then from there, there are some other pieces under the special education eligibility tab. There are screeners and parent notification documents in here. There's an overview of an individual learning plan for dyslexia. That's ILPD overview. Some different interventions that they could look at and talk with a family about. There are some other prompts and best practices around classroom access and support and accommodations. So these are all just kind of built-in features that you as a parent would not necessarily see all of these screens. These are screens that educators and others that are accessing Tennessee Pulse could see. Now, one of the things that people might want to know is, how secure is my child's information in Tennessee Pulse? And it's just like Easy IEP. There are levels of access, and people have to have passwords. TNSTEP is a user in TN Pulse, but we just have access to create mock IEPs or 504s or ILPs. And so we can poke around and look at the pieces, but there's no way we can have access, or anyone else, to your child's plans at all. We can just get in there and create some samples that help families understand the process. And so that's kind of where how to read an IEP came from, this ILP. So you'll see it kind of like it looks, and it's going to look on your child's IEP. There is some information there also about quarterly monitoring and other pieces of information. So you can see here that this is based on student 25 TN STEP. So we have set up different sample IEPs, one for a preschooler, one for a middle schooler, one for a high schooler, that we can work with families and do more in-depth training on these different, what an IEP might look like at different ages, and things might be included. If you have questions, you can type those in the chat box, and we'll have time at the end as well. But if you do have something on a particular screen, these fine ladies are monitoring that, and they'll stop me because I'll get on a roll here. The next piece in Tennessee Pulse is the IEP process. And these are the kind of things that the educator would see: an IEP overview, current information and consideration of special factors, a post-secondary transition plan if your child is the age where they require a transition plan. And then, just because we love, like I said, lots of alphabet soup, the next one says PLAAFP and MAG. So just for fun, if you'd like to type in the chat box, if you know what PLAAFP stands for, we might have some chocolate bars at some point. And I do see a question from Jennifer. How can you get more information on being able to do the mock process with Tennessee Pulse as an advocate? I can connect you with someone, Jennifer, about that offline if you want to email me. And I'm not sure what level of relationship that you would have to have with the Department of Ed. We are a funded family engagement partner, so I believe that's where our access comes from. So we have a present levels of academic and adaptive performance. That was a good guess, close. I'm looking to see if anyone else wanted to weigh in on that. Okay, so that is present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Okay, so that's what we used to call the present levels of performance, or PLOPs. Those have changed. So that's where you're going to see present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And then MAG is measurable annual goals. There is a tab for statewide assessments, supplementary aids services, and least restrictive environment. And you'll see that all of these follow along how an IEP is laid out. And the very last things that you decide are placement issues. So this does follow along in the way that you should write an IEP and look at the information, write your goals, talk about what supports and services you need, and then you talk about least restrictive environment, or where are those services going to be provided, and also extended school year. So it is very systematic, as you're going to see, following these processes in order. And if you try to skip one, it's going to say, no, you have to go back. You haven't filled out this piece of information yet. You haven't considered all the special factors or whatever it is that you missed. So in the next part, like I said, we can have IEPs and 504s in here. So the tab here for special education walks through the pieces: prior written notice, invitation to a meeting, the progress monitoring documents, IEP progress reports, that families are to receive progress reports as often as children without disabilities receive grade cards and progress notices. There is an IEP at a glance, and so that's something that you could ask your team to provide you a copy of. What does your child's IEP at a glance look like? And that might be something that you could advocate for and take a look at as well, because sometimes that's what teachers will have provided to them, so they can very quickly review pieces of your child's IEP and the supports that they are to provide during that. There is a summary of performance, a manifestation determination worksheet that helps walk through the process if there has been a behavior and it is arising to the level of a manifestation determination, and we can talk more about that if that's something that that comes up, but what is included in that. And then there's a medical information form, and just remembering that under IDEA, a parent's not required to provide any medical information in relation to a IEP. Now, that may be necessary for a 504 eligibility, but not for an IEP. And so you can talk about that, what information is included in your child's records on Tennessee Pulse. And you could ask that, does my child have any medical information included, and what does that look like? And then there is gifted reevaluation parent and teacher input form on this particular tab. And then when we go to 504, if your child or a student that you're working with has a 504, there also is a 504 accommodations at a glance form, a 504 medical information certification, because remember, eligibility for 504, you have to have a physical or mental impairment that impacts your learning, and it can be seeing, hearing, breathing, working, learning, a variety of things. There's a prior written notice form under 504 as well, and then a release of information form. So these are the pieces that an educator would be working through in regard to a 504. I told you I was going to tap these things on the head, and so we're going to move pretty quickly through here. This is the individual learning plan, and I believe that the Department of Ed has a couple videos on their website in more detailed about what ILPs are. We're not going to go into all of that today, but that is something that we can talk more about if that's something that you would like to have more information about in a future webinar. But there are screeners that are done, and looking at English proficiency levels really is where a student would get this individual learning plan as well. It has accommodations, what ESL services would they be provided, and then it would create the ILP for that student. Then the ILPD, this again is an individual learning plan for dyslexia, and there are some very specific pieces and criteria that a student would need to meet to get a ILPD. Some students will receive a notification that parents would receive notification that their child shows characteristics of dyslexia and might have a plan, but this is a more in-depth plan, and there are certain criteria that a student would have to meet in order to get this particular plan. I see in the chat box, would a student have an ILP and an IEP, or is it one or the other? That's a great question. And if a student has English as a second language, they could very well have an IEP and an ILP as well, because one is going to talk about their language access kind of things, and the other is going to be their special education needs and supports and services that they need. So they very well could have both. All right. And so this is at a glance, there's a place that says areas of other support. And for each student, a teacher could go and see, are they an English learner? Do they have an active 504 plan? And something to note here, it also shows if they are receiving intervention, response to intervention in tier 2 or tier 3 of RTI. And so that is a great add-on to this features in Tennessee Pulse, where you can look and see what intervention are they receiving in response to intervention in English language, art, and math for tier 1 and tier 3. And I'm sorry, not tier 1. Tier 1 is all students. Tier 2 and tier 3 are response to intervention, more intensive interventions. And so that's another question you can ask is, I'd love to be able to see, is my child receiving RTI in a certain level, and what information do you have about that? And then, of course, if they have an active IEP, um, that would be noted here as well. So that was just a high level overview of the things that educators will see and that families will be walking through this process with their IEP teams, 504 teams, and any other learning needs that a student has. It's all associated in one place now. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. And if you'd like to do something more in depth, we can, but that's basically what that looks like. The next bit of time we have here, I'd like to talk about how to read an IEP. And so some of you said your students are 18 and 16 and 14, and if they've had an IEP for a while, you know these parts very well, but there are some things that are a little bit new that you might want to consider. So I'm just going to go through this, and it could be a refresher for folks. And again, I'm just tapping the major things on the head instead of going through every single thing. But the Tennessee Pulse does make sure that educators hit every one of these things because it won't let them go forward unless they have answered these particular pieces. So that's a good thing. So at the very top, we have under student information, this is demographic information. Above that, you're going to see the IEP effective date. This one is an annual IEP and goes from 9/19/24 to 9/18/25. It has some demographic information there. And then we have information in the box of what is the reevaluation date for eligibility. And this student is eligible. Talk about reevaluation for eligibility in 2027. The primary disability is language impairment. And then you could also have a secondary disability and identify anything else there that you needed to. There's contact information, student strengths and areas of concern under this heading of current information and consideration of special factors for IEP development. I always encourage parents, this is your spot to have a voice, an overview of the student's current performance, areas of student strengths and concerns, making sure that you have information there about what you know your student strengths are and areas of concern. There should be information here also from educators. The next one is parent input and concerns. So be very specific here. Instead of saying, Johnny hasn't learned to read yet, be very specific here about where Johnny is in his reading, what you want to see happen. If you have social concerns about their social or emotional goals and objectives, you can put that here. Anything that you're concerned about. Reading, behavioral skills, inclusion, anything that you're concerned about. One piece that is new here is that it says parent pre-vocational post-secondary input and concerns. And that has not previously been something that was talked about. It's not listed in this specific language in IDEA, but it gives their parents and educators a chance to talk about what are you concerned about and getting your student ready for after high school. So in their pre-vocational, which means their employment, and any other post-secondary kind of things that you have. So it gives you another space to share concerns. I don't see any. Are there any other questions yet? Okay, so how did parents put their information here? You might get a draft IEP and there's some things already in there, but at the actual meeting, going through each one of these things. And that's where you say, I want to add these concerns. And so you might write them out and give them to the team ahead of time, or you can go through them one at a time. But before this is finalized, all of your parent input and concerns must be listed here. So I hope that answers that for you. All right, and then it goes into a description of the adverse impacts of the disability on the student. And this is a statement that the team will talk about, and just talks about what kind of level of supports might they need to participate in the general education curriculum. So it shouldn't be used as a way to justify why they're not in a general ed setting or not participating, but rather what they would need to be able to participate and progress in the regular curriculum. And I'm looking down at my notes because the screenshots are a little small there, and I apologize for that. That's kind of the way we could format this. The consideration of special factors, you talk about, first of all, does a student have limited English proficiency? And what is their mode of language? Is the student blind or visually impaired? And do they need instruction in Braille? And is the student deaf or hard of hearing? And if so, what are their language and communication needs? These are all required questions that have to be answered in the IEP team. So you can see it says, did the IEP team consider these things? We're going to look at a few more on this next slide of considerations of special factors. And if you answered yes, the student is deaf or hard of hearing, do they have opportunities for direct communication with their peers and professionals in their language and communication mode? And so that is very, very important. And if the student is deaf or hard of hearing, did the team consider necessary opportunities for direct instruction in the student's language or communication mode, which means if they use ASL or sign language, have they talked about that in the IEP meeting and gotten that in there? This next one, number 4, is one that I happen to love. Does the student have a consistent, reliable, and effective mode of communication across all education settings? And sometimes a team has not considered how a student with significant disabilities or communication challenges is going to communicate across all educational settings, in the cafeteria, in the classroom, on the playground. And so this question opens up a realm of possibilities for students who have communication needs. And so I would lean into this if you have a student that has communication deficits, uses a communication device, or uses assistive technology or any other kind of way to communicate, making sure that that's documented and talked about. If a student does not have a consistent, reliable, and effective mode of communication, the team should consider what assistive technology may be necessary for the student to respond and engage with their environment. So I love that because a lot of times if you can't communicate, then that leads to frustration, which leads to behaviors, which leads to being out of school or earning you a reputation you don't want to have. So consistent, reliable, and effective mode of communication is awesome. The next factor that needs to be considered is assistive technology, and is it necessary? This is a conversation. It's not already filled out before you get there. No, it's not necessary, and you just move on. We need to have a conversation as a team about, is assistive technology necessary for the student to access and participate across all educational settings. And so, as I said, this really prompts educators to talk about these things with families. It says here, consider assistive technology needs across domains of cognitive and academic, adaptive, communication, physical, and social emotional. And if yes, you must enter the assistive technology device in the Add AT section with supplementary aids and services. And then decide any other thing about a student's language and assistive technology. So one of the examples that it gives here, this is one that was already filled out. This says this student has oral language deficits. She has difficulty organizing her thoughts and expressing herself, and the team should consider how to support her written language. So I think this is all really informative for families and those who are working with them to know these nuances of the IEP as you go through. The next one is behavior considerations. Does the student have behaviors that impede their learning or that of others? Yes or no? And if it's yes, you have to walk through a pretty comprehensive series of questions of how to address that. And like I said, we're just hitting these on the head because we don't have time to go into all of them. The next piece is the post-secondary plan, courses of study. So this is for students starting at age 14. There will be a transition plan with some transition goals. And then at age 16, the student has to be present or give their input in some way into this transition plan. Number 8 on the screen, right above where it says post-secondary transition plan, is post-secondary transition being considered for a student under the age of 13 years and 1 day? In this case, it says no, but that's a new question that is part of Tennessee Pulse that I have not seen in Easy IEP. And it may be that a student needs to have a longer time to work on some of these post-secondary transition goals and considerations. And so if a team feels that way, they could say yes here and begin this transition planning a little bit earlier. All right. So this is particularly associated, this screen, with transition. You can see that here. This is post-secondary transition. So that you would have goals and objectives for this, or your present levels of academic achievement and functional performance related to transition. And then if they're going to have goals in transition, that would be listed here. And you can see all of the areas that have to be considered. So if you're in this particular age range where you're doing a transition plan, you would look at instruction, related services, community experiences, employment and post-school adult living objectives, daily living objectives, functional vocation, and other. And this does have a place that you have to look at. Was the student in attendance at the IEP meeting? That's where the star is, student attendance. And did other agencies participate, and have those listed there? At a minimum, every student's transition plan needs to look at employment and education and training. I do see a question. My son is nonverbal. Non-consideration. Okay, so April, I do see your question. And so one of the things that is very helpful is asking for prior written notice if they have, if the team has said they're not going to provide an AT evaluation, but also going in and looking at each one of the goals and seeing, has your son made measurable progress? And if not, what kind of device might work for him to help him have more access to the curriculum than he currently has? And so one of our team members can walk you through that process and help you write a letter with some good language in there, looking at what's already in your son's IEP, what his goals are, and try to get that, move that needle to access assistive technology. But one of the best kind of considerations for that is if he's not made some progress in areas, then it's time to do something different. And assistive technology could be that that piece that helps the student move forward. Hope that helps. So this is just the general piece that every student's going to have. So we move from transition into a student with an IEP. They will have present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Um, It'll have data in here, norm reference and criteria data, but remember it also has to have descriptive information on the student's deficit areas. So what a student can and cannot do in that area. This particular example, every area is going to have what area did they assess. This one's speech and language. I'm going to move pretty quickly. Exceptional is important. This one says yes. That means, is this a deficit area for this student? If it says no, then it means that this area is fine. We don't need to do anything. We don't need to have a goal. We don't need to have objectives. If it's yes, it means they need goals and support in this area. If it's no, no goal is required. Multiple sources of information are required and parent input can be used as a source of information. So under present levels of performance, it could say parent reports that Sarah is not yet able to navigate stairs without assistance, right? Or parent reports that, Sarah's language across settings, she's not able to communicate with her peers effectively. So parent input can go here as well. This just tells you at the bottom where the information came from. And remember, you don't want to look at an IEP and see data that is 2 years old or 3 years old. It needs to be present levels of academic achievement. So there's a reason that word is there, present, because you're not going to be able to get the goals, what they need to be, and get that student making progress if you're using old data. Which might be something, April, too, to look at. Do you have current information about in this particular areas of concern that would lead to getting assistive technology in the IEP? All right, so then you would look at the measurable annual goals. Remember that short-term objectives are only required for students who are taking an alternate assessment. It doesn't mean that the IEP team, including the parent, couldn't agree to have goals and short-term objectives, but that is something that you would need to talk to the team about. Why is it important to have those annual goals broken down into short-term instructional objectives? But it is not required for every student. Just wanted to point that out. Then you're going to talk about looking at the statewide assessments. Will the student be taking general education assessments? Yes or no? That's an important question that needs to be answered. And that will determine some other things in the IEP. There's a space here for what supports or training do the school staff need. That is supplementary aids and services. So you can see here, it's what training is needed by school personnel in order to support the student in their goals. And they have to describe any training that they will need. So this one says, teacher needs training on assistive technology. So if a child does have a device of some sort, the teacher may need training. This could be training also that families might need. Let's say your child is using sign language and parents need to have some training on some signs that their student's going to be learning. That could go under here as well. And then this student's going to have a graphic organizer. So this is what would be filled out. If you said on the other page, yes, we need assistive technology, it would lead you to fill this in of what the student needs and why, in what settings they need it. The next piece is going to be accommodations and modifications. And on this, I would say more is not always better. It's really looking at the accommodations and does that student need it? Are they using it? Do they know how to use it? And making it very specific to that student, not just picking every accommodation that there is. Okay. I did put here a clock. That says 60 minutes. All of these decisions take time and they take planning. And so making sure that you have set aside enough time at an IEP meeting so you don't feel rushed, so you can ask your questions, so you can get the information that's going to make this IEP work for this student. And if you feel like you don't have enough time, you can ask for another meeting. You don't have to do everything in one meeting. You can ask for another meeting to talk about it and get more information into the IEP. So just remember that is an important piece, is that you need time to plan these things. Okay. Oops. So once you've gone through all of these pieces, going back here to this, you wrote some goals because it was an exceptional area. Speech and language goals were written, and this particular one, there was 3 goals for this student. And then you'll talk about special education related services. And so we're going to take a look at this real quick. If a student is going to be provided any related service, speech and language, occupational therapy, physical therapy, there's so many related services, I can't name them all. They would be here and it would say how many times per month or how many times per week, how long is the session going to be, and where it's going to be. And so if you have talked and your child is going to get one of these services one-on-one, it shouldn't say in the general education setting, because this student's going to receive these services in a general education setting. So it's going to be a group. And so you need to talk about those things. Where is that going to be? Where is that going to happen? And make sure it's very specific. I put a star here on beginning and ending dates, because from the date that it says it's going to start till the date that it says it's going to end, except during the summer, when school is in session, your child has a right to those services. And so if the therapist is out for a month on maternity leave, your child still has a right to those services. And so making sure that you're getting some reports from those therapists, from those providers on what they're working on, and that they did indeed have those related services. And if there's any cases where a student has missed sessions, you can talk about compensatory services to make up those sessions. Because the team decided they needed it, you can't just skip them if a therapist is out or those kind of things. Now, if the student is absent, that's a different story. Okay. If the student is there and can participate and is available, then the service has to be provided like it was outlined, because the team agreed that's what they need. So important to know that placement decisions are made last and cannot be predetermined. The type and amount of related services is based on the student's individual needs, not on the therapist's availability or any other factors except what that student needs. And then again, they must be provided from the beginning date to the ending date. Let's see, we'll move to the next slide. There are a couple questions here when we get to the end of the IEP that talks about, is the student going to be educated with their non-disabled peers in the regular classroom? And the extent to which they are not, they have to do a justification here why this student would not be in the regular education classroom. And then if the student also has a right to participate in extracurricular and non-academic activities. So making sure that they have the supports that they need. If a child needs support to participate in extracurricular and non-academic activities, this is where you would talk about it, and you would add, this student can participate, but they will need X in order to participate. And then if the student is in their LEA or zone school, their home school, that would be listed here. If they are in some other placement, that would be listed. Special transportation is talked about if a student needs special transportation other than the general typical school bus to get to school, they would put that here. What is the special transportation? And remember what supports are necessary for that student to successfully get to school so that they can access this IEP that you spent all of the time putting together. We're getting close to the end of these, and then I'll see if we have any questions. Extended school year is something that is on the IEP, and generally there will be a statement in the IEP that says the IEP team will reconvene to determine if extended school year is required, and there'll be a date. So this one happens to say March 24th. And that gives you a window to talk about what is the student need, look at the data. Has there been regression over times when they've been out, like at fall break or winter break or other types of things? Are there things that they need continuous attention to over the summer? Don't let that date be something that says like the end of April, because then if you disagree, you don't have time to work on that until school's going to be over. So ESY is not summer school. Children with disabilities can participate in summer school too, depending on what is being offered. But this is individual to this student. It is not summer school. It's based on the needs of the individual student and not on whatever's available during the summer in that particular school. It is a team decision that you would look at data to determine. It's not predetermined. And again, these should be held early enough to ensure that decisions can be made before the school year ends. So we get a lot of calls the week before school's out. We're just now having extended school year discussions, and you don't have time to resolve anything. So ask for those to be talked about earlier. Look on your child's IEP. You can look at it right now and see what date does that say, and look and see if that gives you a long enough window to have those discussions about extended school year, to learn more about it. We have packets of information about ESY. If you need that, if that's not something that you're as familiar with. And it could be that maybe you want to let Sue know that that's a topic that families would like to know more about, is how is ESY determined and what all does that entail? And we could do a training on that as well. This is the signature page, and this is the page where if you attended the IEP, you would sign this, okay? And then there's a box here. These used to be two separate pieces. One you signed if you attended, and one you checked it in another place if you were in agreement. So if you don't agree with the IEP, you can sign here, but don't check in agreement. And then you have 14 days to provide consent. You don't have to sign consent at the meeting. You can say, I'd like to take this and talk it over with my husband, or have some time to review it. But just remember that on the 15th day, the IEP will go into effect, whether a parent signs it or not, unless some other action is taken. So just letting you know that sometimes parents will sign, and that this is a signature that you attended and participate in. So I see, Christina, where do we get access to the ESY information packets? I can send that to Sue, and she can send that out to the listserv as well, or you can email me and I'll send that to you. I'll send that to you as well. I'd have to look and see if it's updated on our website. Generally, a lot of those packets are on the website. All right, and then this talks about, I'm just going to go through this very quickly because I want to give time for some questions. If your child is 18, their rights pass to them at age 18 unless it's determined that otherwise, and think other arrangements have been made. And that's one of the things that we'll be talking about next month when we talk about supported decision making. And so it doesn't mean your child has to have a conservatorship. I don't have time to go into this, but it says, the student's conservator or representative, if the student's over 18, or it has a valid conservatorship or power of attorney. This is an in-depth conversation that we can't talk about in 2 minutes, but the school is required to provide a notice to parents that a transfer of rights will be happening at age 18 and provide you information about what that means specifically. And you can consider supported decision making and some other things as well. So I hate just saying that and then leaving it in case you like that makes your heart race, because it sometimes does. And I've had that experience with my own daughter and hundreds of families that we've walked through helping with this process. But the parent signs consent for IEP services unless the child is 18. And then the student will sign that consent unless there is something else in place. That's about the easiest way I can say that. And then you have to check yes or no for each of the statements. I've been fully informed in my native language or preferred mode of communication of all information relevant to the proposed program. I've been offered a copy of my notice of procedural safeguards and who to contact if I have questions. One of these options, either a draft IEP was developed and provided to me 48 hours before the meeting, or a draft IEP was developed and it was not provided prior to the IEP team meeting. The school has to select one of these. Did they do a draft IEP? All right, so that was like the fast and furious, what's included in an IEP and how to read an IEP. Do you have questions for me? And then also in the chat box, if you could put other topics that you are interested in, any pieces of the IEP you'd like to delve more into, anything that we can do to help. And I will put my contact information in the chat box.
And while she's doing that, I did want to mention too that I put my information, contact information in the chat box as well. So if you are from Knox County and you're having trouble like getting some of those things or you have questions, I never discourage anybody from talking with Tennessee STEP or any of those other places. I'm just giving you another option that I can help with those things as well. So you can do either one. I did see there was a question, and Karen, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if you covered it or not. There was a question about, can parents get that information and see all that information in Pulse? If you want to do that and you don't already have you have a password that you would get from if you're in Knox County, you would get it from your case manager. So if you don't have access to Pulse, that's the way to do it. And you won't be able to see everything that Karen went over, but you will be able to see any of the completed documents. Like you would be able to see the IAP, you would be able to see those things that are already implemented, and some of the other things that Karen mentioned that are kind of supportive, informational. The last thing I'm going to say is that we are doing what we call our bump up meetings, which is when they're talking about that ESY questions. So this is actually very timely. It's a good time to do those things. Karen, one of the questions they're asking is certificate of attendance. And I didn't know if you were interested, if you do that or not.
We definitely can do that. And if you want to just email me, if you would like a certificate of attendance, just send it to me and say, I would like a certificate of attendance for the Tennessee Pulse How to Read an IEP, and we'll get that email to you. I did see Brittany, and I took down that one in particular that you wanted a certificate. So you don't have to email me. I have it. I'll send that. Anybody else that thinks about that and wants a certificate, let me know. I do appreciate you guys. You were kind of my test group on this. We have just recently pulled together all of this information, and from Tennessee Pulse and just looking at it and seeing what could be helpful for families and advocates to have a little bit better understanding of the TN Pulse versus the Easy IEP. And so if you have questions or areas that you think would make this more beneficial for you, please feel free to email me your suggestions and anything questions that you have.
And just real quickly, a quick plug. If you enjoyed Karen is actually going to be coming back to us on the 14th. She kind of alluded to that already. She's going to be doing decision making through the lifetime, and she's going to be doing that on the 14th. That is also a Monday. We will also have ARC Tennessee will be coming on the 23rd, and they're going to do an IEP 101. So I wanted you to be aware of those two things, those two dates to get on the calendar. There will be a place, they're asking if there's a place to access the recordings. We will have that on the SpedPAC web page, and I can share that with you. Also, we're going to be sharing it with Karen. I'm going to let her talk about where that might be accessible.
Right. So we're going to put this on our tnstep.info website. Once we get that, there is a section there that says archived webinars, and you can access that in that space as well. And if I mentioned any other thing that you would like to have, such as the ESY packets or things like that, please just contact us. You can email gethelp@tnstep.info, and that is for any request. You can, Lisa is very timely about getting those. And then our website is tnstep.info. So that is how you will find a variety of all kinds of information, from our newsletters to packets to current events that are coming up and things like that.
Perfect. Karen, as always, I always appreciate you, and I really did enjoy this presentation. I think it was a wonderful overview. That was a lot of information to share. So I think you did a great job with that.
Well, thank you guys so much for letting me hang out with you today, and I appreciate it. And I'll see some of you next month and on another subject, but please reach out if we can help. And I know Sue is a great help as well. So all of these questions, if you get stuck, just know that you have lots of options for resources between what Knox County provides and TNSTEP and other organizations. We want you to be able to navigate special education and just understanding that it is complex. And so that support is here, and we really want you to reach out and take advantage of that.
Also, before we go out, I also wanted to mention Jenny Reed is also on the call, and she does a lot of the same kind of work. She's helped out. So I always want to let you see her face and know her name, because she is an excellent resource for our preschool families as well. All right, if there are no other questions, we really appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully next month.
Thank you.